Hi everyone, thanks for tuning back into my next episode. This episode is after a lesson I had last weekend, so I just wanted to record some of the thoughts I'd had. So the lesson was changes in airspeed in straight and level flight, so speeding up, slowing down, and then slowing enough to introduce flap. When I got to the aerodrome, the weather was good, so I knew we were going, and I was in Golf Sierra India X-Ray Tango, which is my first flight in that aircraft. It was the first flight of the day for the aircraft, so they asked me to do the A-check, and then the instructor followed me round afterwards. So I was left to my own devices with the aircraft. It was quite a weird feeling. It's kind of the first time I've had to do it on my own. And so I felt the weight of that responsibility, and I did the walk around, so I followed my checklist. There were a couple of issues with the aircraft itself. The nav lights weren't working, but we checked the minimum equipment list to see if that was okay, and for daytime VFR flying it was fine to go without those. Also, the flap handle was quite stiff, so I found it difficult to get the aircraft to do flap 3. So again, this is something that I just checked with the instructor, and obviously they know the aircraft better than I do, so he was able to say it's just a feature of that particular aircraft, and when you're up in the air it doesn't seem to be quite so difficult to get that flap setting. So as part of the walk around, I did the standard checks of the fuel drains to check for water and sediment, checking all of the flight surfaces were moving as they should do, etc, etc. I also had to open up the engine cowls to check for debris or any loose connections in there, check the status of the spark plugs and the wires leading to them. And actually this is where I made quite a significant mistake. I'm not sure if you've seen them before. I'll try and put a little picture up on the screen now so you know what I'm talking about, but each side of the engine has a cowl that you lift up to have a look inside, and then when I close them it's got two little clips that you kind of do this in, and then you tie the bottom bit down and check that it's up. I'm certain that I closed them, but actually it turns out when the instructor came to follow up behind me, both sides were still open. Obviously a big safety risk if you're flying along. The air's going to get inside there and rip those open, and eventually they'll come off. So to say I was disappointed in my mistake is an understatement, but I guess that's the point of this method of learning. Hey ho, live and learn, and I'm almost certain I'll never make that mistake again. I worked with the instructor to try and get a better idea of how the rudder pedals work in this lesson, because previously it's felt really unusual to steer the aircraft on the ground with my feet. Still feels a bit weird, but I think it was more controlled this time than it has been before. So once we'd finished the power checks, I called through to the tower to request takeoff clearance. My radio telephony was much better this time because I have the crib sheet from the flying school. It's not here right now, but it gives you a study guide to say what you should be saying and when. So my radio calls were good, and as we were lining up, the instructor suggested that I do the takeoff roll with him kind of shadowing me on the controls. So my first takeoff, which was incredible, what an amazing feeling, and to be on my third lesson and taking off for the first time was just an amazing experience. It went quite well. It wasn't too windy, the wind was coming down the runway heading, so it was quite steady, but good experience to feel how much rudder you need to kick in to hold the aircraft straight and level, and just like I say, an amazing experience to be doing the first one. So after takeoff we turned to the north and flew out towards the north side of Wickham, towards Ardley Power Station, which is a really big landmark as you fly kind of north away from the aerodrome. And then we started playing around with the power basically to see the effect on the aircraft, holding it straight and level with more or less power in. I was actually really surprised at how much additional effort you need when you're on the control column. When you add power, for example, the application of power is quite slow, and so you're steadily putting more and more pressure on the control column and then trimming it off. But I was surprised. I was like, at some stage when I applied full power, I was really having to push forward on the control column to make sure we stayed level. So yeah, quite interesting. I guess I wasn't really expecting that. Also with the application of flaps, when you put in a stage of flaps, because the wind's generating extra lift, you kind of balloon a little bit first and then settle down. And again, holding the pitch of the aircraft was much more of a struggle than I was expecting. I'm not sure if X-Ray Tango is harder to fly, but for some reason it just felt a little bit more creaky and a little bit old. So it was quite interesting to feel the difference between the 2 aircraft or 3 aircraft that I've flown now. So once we'd finished holding the aircraft level and increasing and decreasing the speed, it was time to fly back because the weather was closing in around us a little bit. And again, that was something else that was really quite cool to see from that perspective for the first time, is we had storms building from the west, and where the clouds started being quite small when we first got up in the air, by about half an hour into the lesson you could see that the clouds were starting to thicken and get darker in colour. So we took that as our cue to kind of start heading back and getting safely on the ground, and we'd finished all of the exercises that I wanted to cover in the lesson anyway. So we flew back in. I did the radio telephony to the tower to let them know we were at one of the reporting points. Another quick thing that I learned was to try and shorten my responses. So I think they said to report finals and I was number 1, and my response was Roger, report finals, number 1, Golf X-Ray Tango, whereas actually all I had to say was Wilco. And the instructor was just trying to get across, you want to try and limit the amount of time you're spending on frequency. So again, I think that will just come with practice. So after about 40 minutes we rejoined and turned onto the approach, and again the instructor started to let me control the approach pretty much down to getting the wheels on the ground. So this particular lesson is going to be quite cool because not only did I do my first takeoff, but pretty much did my first landing too. He was teaching me where to be looking on the runway as we head down, and it's basically dividing your attention between a single point on the runway just above the designation numbers and the airspeed to maintain a kind of steady speed down to the runway. And then as you look towards the end of the runway, there's 2 hedge lines, one on a kind of further away field and one kind of a bit closer. And as those start to merge, you can begin to flare the aircraft, and then it's just about holding the attitude until the wheels touch the ground. It was quite a cool landing, and again, an amazing experience to say I'd done it pretty much on my own. How exciting. So that was pretty much all we covered in the lesson. The instructor very kindly spent a good 20 minutes folding my map for me, because before it was huge and I couldn't really work out how I was supposed to use it for navigation, but now he's folded it so it's got the right area. So soon we'll start talking about navigation and cross-country flying. I must admit my biggest fear about the lessons that I'm taking is not so much the flying of the aircraft, but knowing where you are all of the time, because I'm seeing in my Facebook feed and Twitter feeds so many reports of pilots inadvertently flying into controlled airspace, and right next to Wickham Air Park is Heathrow airspace, so I'm really keen not to get that wrong. So hopefully I'll learn more about that. I've started to read the navigation book, so the Pooley's navigation book. I must admit the first couple of chapters I found quite dull because they're talking about sciencey stuff and geography stuff, whereas now I'm getting onto the actual nitty-gritty of planning a flight and what that involves. I think it's kind of a bit more practical, so I'm finding it a bit easier to read. But I suppose more on that when my instructor starts covering it for me. I'm hoping to have a lesson tomorrow. It's Friday today and it's the end of a bit of a busy week. There's been some conference activity at work that I've been involved in, hence why I'm probably looking a bit tired. So I've been preparing for my flying lesson tomorrow. We're hoping to do climbs, descents and turns, or maybe one or two of those things depending on what the weather's like tomorrow. It's cloudy today, although I can see some blue sky now, but we'll just see how we get on when we get there. I'm hoping that my parents might visit the aerodrome with me tomorrow. It should be quite cool for them to see it, have a little look around. My dad's a keen photographer now, so hopefully I'll get some really good pictures that I can share with you in a later episode. So for now, just popping up on the screen the usual Instagram and Twitter feeds. As I said before, feel free to drop me a message if there's anything that you want me to cover in these video blogs, or any feedback that you have. But for now, just to say thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.